Hey everybody, welcome to CAF Warbird Tube, the show where we talk about World War II, aviation, history, and so much more. Warbird Tube is produced by the Commemorative Air Force, the world's largest flying museum. Our mission is to educate, inspire, and honor through flight and living history experiences. The CAF began the Warbird movement more than 65 years ago, and thanks to the support of individuals like you, we continue to grow strong. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and now our host, Steve Buss. Thanks for watching and keep them flying.
Good evening, airplane fans, and welcome to another edition of CAF Warbird Tube. Tonight, on episode number 205, we're joined by Becky Aikman. She's the author of the book Spitfires, the American Women Who Flew in the Face of Danger During World War II. We'll find out more about this very fascinating story in just a moment. Now, whether you're joining us for the very first time or you're a loyal Warbird Tube fan, we are very happy to have you with us this evening. We appreciate you being here, and if you don't mind, if you like what you see, please spread it across your social media platforms. We do appreciate it. Now, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, make sure you also click that bell icon, and you'll get notifications when our new episodes are posted. Warbird Tube is made possible by the Commemorative Air Force. If you'd like to find out more about CAF, our events, our aircraft, many of which are out on tour right now throughout the spring, summer, and fall, just visit our website, commemorativeairforce.org. Now, Becky is joining us from New York. She is a journalist. She's had her work published in Newsday, New York Times, the LA Times, and she's also the author of now 3 books. This is the third one, Spitfires, the American Women Who Flew in the Face of Danger During World War II. Becky, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, good. I gave a little bit of your background, but I want to fill in some of the other significant things that you've accomplished in your career.
Well, I was a newspaper reporter for a long time, and I left that because I wanted to tell stories that were more complex, that had more to them, where I needed more space. So books seemed like the perfect thing, although it was very daunting at first. My first book was a memoir about how I was widowed at a young age and how I formed an amateur support group with other widows to try to remake our lives. It was called Saturday Night Widows. And my next book was about the making of the film Thelma and Louise. And that's how one great women's film got made in Hollywood against the odds. This one is really a fantastic story. I was so shocked to learn that hardly anyone knew about it. It's something everyone should know about in our World War II history. So I'm very excited that it's finally done. It took me 5 years because it was complex research, and now it's ready to go, and I'm excited to have people read it.
That's true. The book was actually released yesterday, 6th of May, just in time for the 80th anniversary of VE Day, which is tomorrow, on May 8th. So congratulations.
Thank you. I thought it was a good time to release the book because that's a day for commemorating people who did heroic deeds in the war, and these are people who should be recognized for that.
How did you land on this subject? Of all the things you could have written about in World War II, for instance, why did this one stand out?
It actually started in a strange way. I was talking to my mother, who was a young child during World War II, and I was telling her that I'd like to write a book about people who did something amazing, but no one has heard about it. And she immediately said, you should write about the American women who flew in England during World War II. And I said, never even heard of that. I wondered if she was confused. I did a little research to find out anything written in the United States at first about it. But eventually I went back to her and she said, no, I saw it in a newsreel or a magazine article or something. I remember it so clearly. Those women seemed so noble and glamorous. I wished I could do what they did. So I knew she had to be right, and eventually I did track down the story. It took some doing because it was forgotten after the war, even though these women were the first American women to fly military aircraft. And that's something quite notable.
It certainly is. The Air Transport Auxiliary in England, or ATA it was known, so they kind of got the nickname the ATA Girls. That was, the auxiliary was in effect or in place from February of 1940 until the end of November of 1945. And not just females were part of this group. There were a lot of others, but it was almost, reading the description in the book, it was almost a kind of a ragtag group of pilots who, for one reason or another, weren't in the military, but still wanted to contribute. And these ladies fit right in.
Yes, it had a rather rakish reputation. It was started out of a dire need. Europe had fallen to the Nazi regime, except for Great Britain. It was in desperate straits. They were under constant aerial attack, and the very existence of the country was in doubt. They desperately needed more aircraft and more pilots. The aircraft, they geared up with the factories, but the pilots, that was a tough one. They were training them as fast as they could. So they decided that the task of delivering the new aircraft and returning the damaged aircraft could fall to people who didn't ordinarily qualify for the Royal Air Force. So this included people who were too old, people who'd lost an arm or a leg or an eye in the war. They allowed foreigners to join, and even women. So it was the opportunity for people to fly who couldn't fly any other way. And the organization, because it started so quickly and so seat of the pants, had this reputation for making do and getting by whatever it took. They had a lot of nicknames. One of them was Ancient and Tattered Airmen. One of them was Always Terrified Airwomen. And Atta Girls was a popular one also.
It's also interesting to note, as you're talking about it, I'm sure those who are not familiar with this group will go back to the United States and the WASP program, Women's Air Force Service Pilots. And there is a connection between the ATA and the WASP, and that connection is Jackie Cochran. And I believe it was back in 1939, she had tried to advocate for women to be either in the service or be able to be a part of the service. And she didn't really get anywhere, but eventually when ATA was formed, she was sent over to England to kind of see what was going on.
Yes, when she failed to convince anyone to allow women to fly in the United States, she did go over to Great Britain because she knew that they were allowing women to fly, and she volunteered there to organize a group of American women and bring them over. Her hope was that this would establish that this was a good idea, and she could then eventually go back and start the WASP, which is what happened after the American women performed very well in Great Britain, and the other women from other countries as well. She was able to make that case. So they helped lead to the WASP program.
It's very, very interesting. How are these ladies selected? I mean, they came from a wide variety of backgrounds. Some were barnstorming pilots, coming from very influential and wealthy families, and just a wide variety of backgrounds, but all with this incredible passion for aviation at a time when it was really not very easy for a woman to learn how to fly. She had to break through quite a few barriers just to get to the airport.
Exactly. And I think this is why it was a particularly fierce group of women. They were women who had managed to learn to fly when it was really hard to do that. A lot of women didn't even know how to drive in the 1930s. And these women were from various backgrounds. Some of them were well-to-do, and so their families could pay for them to have flying lessons. Some of them were not well-to-do at all. One of them bartered for flying lessons by offering to jump out of an aircraft with a parachute with no training for an air show. She had to jump 3 times, and then they would give her the flying lessons, so she did that. Another one did a mock striptease in an air show where she would fly over the show and throw out one item of clothing at a time until she landed fully clothed, and the audience was disappointed. But she earned her living that way, flying. Some of them were well-known stunt pilots who performed in air shows, and some were pilots who had wonderful records in air races and setting records for endurance and speed. So it was a real mix. One was someone who graduated from college and got free classes at her college because they couldn't fill the whole class with men, and so she had just barely enough hours to qualify. So Jackie Cochran got the records of everyone who had more than 300 hours flying and wrote a telegram to them. And the women who received it couldn't believe their luck. They all wanted to fly. They all wanted to fly in the war and knew they couldn't for their own country. They got this telegram, and it was a dream come true. It promised they'd fly the latest, most advanced aircraft in the world and participate in the war. So they had to go to Montreal to pass a flight check in order to be chosen.
Yeah, very, very, I can't imagine what that telegram would have been like, because all of those aviators at the time, everyone knew who Jackie Cochran was, and to be invited to be a part of this group had to be a real honor. And two things I like about this picture. First of all, this is Helen Richie and with Jackie Cochran, and I just love the period costume, or the period clothing that they're wearing. But more importantly, it's the Beech Stagger wing that's right behind them. I always love that airplane.
Well, Helen Richie was one of the most accomplished of the pilots and with the most experience. And she did once set an endurance record for hours over Miami. And now I forget the exact number of hours, but it was a couple days. And the aircraft had to be refueled with a hose. She went out in a fierce wind to do it. She said it was like wrestling a cobra in a hurricane. And then later in the flight, she had to go out with a needle and thread because it was fabric wing and there was a tear in it, and she had to stand in this gale force wind sewing the wing together. Nevertheless, she had trouble getting a job flying because people said she wouldn't be strong enough. Right. So that was highly dubious. But she was one of the people who was thrilled to go to Montreal. And when they were there, they had to pass a flight test on a Harvard AT-6, which was a trainer aircraft for fighter pilots made in the United States. And the United States was making a lot of them for Great Britain at the time, even though the United States wasn't yet in the war. The women, most of them had never flown anything that went more than maybe 65 miles an hour. The Harvard went 200 miles an hour. It had a hugely increased amount of horsepower. And it had all kinds of gadgets and gizmos they had never seen before. They had never seen retractable wheels. They had never seen flaps to slow it down when it landed. They had all kinds of gauges that they had no idea what they were doing. And each one of them had maybe 2 or 3 hours to practice with an instructor, and then had to solo. And then very shortly after that had to pass the test of flying this aircraft that even experienced pilots at the time called the Yellow Terror, because it was loud and hard to fly. But a few did not pass and others did. It was great training for what they would do in the Air Transport Auxiliary, because the job there was to step into unfamiliar planes and fly them with very little training or experience. And so you had to have a great instinctive feel for how to fly and be able to do it without panicking or thinking I need more lessons first. So it was a great test, and those who passed were thrilled because this was their dream come true.
And as you mentioned earlier, not only were they ferrying airplanes from the factory to air bases in England, but also the damaged airplanes coming back. So not only did they have to know how to fly all these aircraft, but also fly with some that were not factory fresh, which had to be a challenge of its own.
That's right. And even the factory fresh ones frequently had mechanical difficulties and failed in the air. This was one of the most dangerous jobs of the war. 1 in 7 pilots for the ATA was killed in the course of the work. It's because the new aircraft coming out of the factories hadn't been very well tested, so they would frequently be high in the sky and suddenly the engine would stop for unknown reasons. They also did fly back aircraft that had been often severely damaged. There were doors, bullet holes all through the fuselage, broken glass on the windshield, things held together with tape. So it wasn't just that they were flying all different aircraft, they were flying under crazy conditions that often led to real disasters or near disasters, and people had to stay calm and cope and try to get out of these messes.
Yes. Well, how many women were initially selected to go overseas?
There were 25 American women who went, and that included Jackie Cochran herself.
And were there more that came later, or was that just the group that stayed?
For the whole time.
All right.
Actually, there were one or two who came later on their own. I'm only counting the Jackie Cochran group, but it was maybe a handful signed later.
Well, Dorothy Fury is the one that her story starts out your book, and you're talking about unique ways of learning how to fly. She actually traded in her car to her flight instructor so she could learn how to fly.
Right.
And a couple of years later, ended up with her commercial ticket, but no car. But again, just kind of a testament to the lengths that these women were going to reach their dream to be in the sky.
Right. And that's because every one of them absolutely loved to fly. They felt euphoric in the air. They felt that freedom that people who fly all are familiar with. They could go where they wanted, do what they wanted. They were in charge up there. The ones who were stunt pilots enjoyed making the aircraft dance in the air, and it gave them a real burst of joy to do it. That's why they were so determined to try to keep finding a way to stay in the sky, whatever it took.
And reading about Dorothy and her experiences going over in a ship from the United States to England, of course, at that time, the U-boats were wreaking havoc with the convoys. And they actually split the ladies up so that if one of the ships went down, they would not lose the whole group, because I understand that had happened to some male fighter pilots, or pilots at least, on a previous convoy.
Yes, it had. They had lost the entire group. I think it was 19 men who lost in that. And the first 5 women went over on a cargo ship. It was one of 6 sister ships that made the crossing between Canada and Liverpool. And the other 5 had all been lost by this time. So it was not a picnic, being sure you would make it over there.
Tell us a little bit about Dorothy's background.
Well, Dorothy was a fascinating person. She was considered a great beauty. She actually grew up in a quite impoverished background, and she only had an 8th grade education. But she was quite self-educated. She loved to read and could come across as someone who knew the world, when in fact she did not. She was determined to make a completely new life for herself in England, and she felt she could reinvent herself as the character she chose to be. She had a very imperious attitude about her, and she had one red dress that she recycled for every social event. She managed to convince people over there that she was some sort of American aristocrat. She sounded very educated. She was very beautiful. She was invited everywhere. And her goal was to marry well and make her way into the British aristocracy.
And she could fly.
And she could fly. She could do it all. But the opportunity to fly over there gave her that opportunity to do everything else she wanted. And she was not someone to be messed with. If she wanted something, she got it.
Certainly. Anne Wood is another one of the ladies that are featured in the book. And again, another just fascinating story. Now, different than Dorothy, Anne was a college graduate.
Yes, she was a college graduate, and she also was often described in England as a Philadelphia socialite, because she was born in Philadelphia and she had that sort of accent like Katharine Hepburn.
Sure.
But in fact, her father had died when she was quite young, and her family had very little money. She went to college, however, and after college, she needed a career because she had to support her mother and her younger siblings. She heard that the civilian pilot training program, which was started to train pilots for the war, gave free lessons. So suddenly, flying seemed like a good idea. And she did manage to get the one slot that no man would take in the class, and became the best pilot in the class. She had 300 hours that you needed to qualify, barely, but she would often confide that she may not have really had that many. But she went to New York City to meet with Jackie Cochran in her very fancy apartment, because Jackie was a self-made millionaire on top of being the most famous aviator in the country. Anne Wood had wonderfully polished manners and a way of getting along with everyone, and she impressed Jackie Cochran with her poise. Jackie wanted to have good pilots, and she also wanted to have women who would make a good impression because of her goal of being able to start the WASP. So she saw that Anne would be an ideal candidate for that purpose. When Anne got to England, she was perfect for that role. She always wanted a career in aviation, like all the other women, but not necessarily as a pilot. She wanted to be in charge of things. She wanted a managerial job. She wanted to do something important. So she spent her downtime in England making connections with diplomats and generals and journalists and spies, people who she felt could help her to get a great job after the war. She also started as a rather timid pilot because she knew she had less experience than the others, but she had a can-do attitude, and by the end of the war, she was widely considered to be one of the best pilots in the ATA. She would go anywhere, do anything, fly whatever they threw at her, including some things she wasn't necessarily supposed to fly when other people would let her. So she had an extraordinary career and was widely recognized during the war.
And post-war, she eventually joined Pan Am and became their first female vice president.
She was the female vice president of any major airline in the United States. So she did achieve that goal.
Here's Hazel Raines, another of our featured ladies.
Mm-hmm. She came from a very traditional Southern family in Georgia. She described her mother and sisters as hat and glove churchgoers. She herself went to college to study music, so it was all very sedate and very expected. But something about flying appealed to her. She became the first woman in Georgia to get a pilot's license and the first to get a commercial pilot's license. And then she did something that I can't imagine how her mother took it. She joined the Georgia Air Races and Show as a stunt pilot who thrilled the crowds with her amazing exploits. There she is in her outfit that she wore in the shows. She would do an act where she went up into the air and did loop-de-loops, and then she would put the aircraft into a dramatic spin and pull out right at the last moment close to the ground when people were screaming in terror. So this experience turned out to be extremely valuable during the war. She was assigned a Spitfire fighter fresh from a factory and was in the air, and the engine failed completely. She thought she could get turned around and find an airfield that she knew was nearby and glide down there. So she positioned herself for that. But at that moment, as often happened in England, she ran into a cloud bank. She had zero visibility. She was in the middle of trying to do a turn. She lost the lift of the aircraft and went into a deadly spin. Very much like what she did in the air show, but unfortunately in clouds, so she had no idea where the ground was. When she did finally break out of the clouds, she was very close to the ground, too close to save herself, theoretically, but she did have all this amazing experience. So she did manage to get the Spitfire level right before she hit a thatched roof cottage that exploded along with much of the Spitfire. The Spitfire was unsalvageable. The people who lived in the town, of course, saw and heard the crash and ran to, as they say, dig the dead man out of the cockpit. When they opened the canopy, up popped Hazel, very much alive, blood streaming down her face, speaking in an American accent. Everyone drew back in shock. Not only was the pilot alive, the pilot was a woman, and the pilot was from America. No one understood how this happened. So she did manage to save herself, which very few people probably could have done under those circumstances. It's the two really bad things that could go wrong for ATA pilots, and they happen simultaneously.
Here's Helen Ritchie.
Yes. Helen Ritchie, I talked about her briefly before. She's the one who set the endurance record by going out on the wing to sew partway through. She also was a partner with Amelia Earhart in a cross-country race at one time. She did a lot of very pioneering things in aviation, and she had the most hours of any pilot who went over with Jackie Cochran to join up. So everyone saw her as the one to beat. They all were very competitive, trying to get advanced to the most advanced aircraft as soon as possible. She was promoted first to fighters, and I believe, no, she wasn't promoted first to bombers. But it was interesting, when the war started, no one was sure who would excel at this work. They didn't know whether the ones with the most experience would excel, or maybe the ones with less experience who were more devil may care and didn't get rattled. There was also a question of whether people who were very careful would do better, or people who were kind of wild and thrill-seeking would do better. In the end, it turned out that those who became the top pilots were distinguished by the fact that they had absolutely steady nerves. And unfortunately, Helen Ritchie had a couple accidents early on that seemed to rattle her, and she had trouble from then on keeping her nerves steady. So she did eventually leave the service earlier than expected, and much to the shock of everyone who expected that she would be the one they would all look up to throughout.
It's interesting. I can't quite tell you what airplane that is, but obviously high performance, better than the Cubs that they were probably training in here in the United States. But as you mentioned earlier, they flew literally everything in the inventory, from the smallest to the largest. And when I saw this picture, and the next picture, Joan Hughes, one of the ATA girls, with a Sterling bomber. And I've known that a Sterling was a large aircraft, but I didn't realize how large that was. It's just enormous.
Yes, I would go visit these aircraft over in England, and I thought, how do you even get in and out of the thing? You need an elevator. Joan made a very famous remark when she was assigned to fly these extremely large bombers, and some people expressed skepticism that a woman had the strength to do that. She said, "The job is for the plane to lift me, not for me to lift the plane." Which is true. Anybody who flies knows you operate what you need to operate. You do not have to have tremendous physical strength, although endurance was very helpful for the long hours in the cockpit. There she is again, again looking very small next to her assignment for the day.
Is there a record of how many missions that the American women flew, or is that sort of one of those lost to history sort of things?
No, some of their logbooks still exist, so you can tell from that how many they flew. I don't remember offhand. I know how many types many of them flew, and it was several dozen at least. There was a maximum of 147 different aircraft that they might be required to fly, and no one that I know of did all 147, because that would include different marks of the same aircraft. But some of the women flew just about everything there was to fly, some really unusual ones, and some of the ones we've all heard of.
Yes. And that was going to be my follow-up. Was there anyone who flew all of them? Obviously not, but they didn't necessarily stay to just fighters or just trainers, just bombers. They took almost whatever they could train and be able to safely fly.
On any given day, they could be assigned anything in the RAF repertoire. The one thing women were not allowed to fly was the Sunderland flying boat that landed on the sea, and that was because there was no accommodation for women to sleep on board ships. However, Ann Wood did manage to fly one at the end of the war when it was being sent to be mothballed basically up in Scotland. And she learned to take off and land. It was very tricky because it didn't have pontoons like what we think of as an aircraft that can land and take off from water. The body of it just went along the water until takeoff, and the same with the landing. And so you had to really tip it just so that it would break the seal with the water when takeoff occurred. So it was tricky to learn that, and Ann Wood managed that and felt like she had notched one more aircraft on her list.
And this is Mary Hooper.
Yes. Yes. Before the war, her name was Mary Zerbel. She was quite celebrated in the United States because she had been the youngest woman flying instructor in the United States at the age of 19. She was photographed frequently for the newspapers, also because she was very pretty. When she went to the war, she was also widely covered in the newspapers when she and her fiance became the first two American people serving in the war to marry. And there was a great deal of international coverage of that. After the war, by the way, her life was so dramatic that Lana Turner starred in a film based on Mary's life. Lady Takes a Flyer.
Ah, okay.
It was apparently pretty trashy. Mary said that at one point they had Lana Turner walk out of a flaming crash without a speck of dust on her. Apparently, when Mary walked out of a flaming crash, she got a little dirty.
Oh,
This is another Mary in this photo. Her name was Mary Webb Nicholson. She was also a well-known stunt pilot and one of the early women to fly in the United States. She was one of the earliest members of the 99s, which was an organization of women pilots, and she was an officer in it. She later became the personal assistant to Jackie Cochran. She was very frustrated that she had to stay behind in New York to facilitate all of the other women going to England, and so she didn't get to go until the last ship. She very much wanted to fly, and her story is rather tragic. She was in an aircraft where there was an oil leak, and that caused the propeller to seize off and fall off the aircraft. It was a Miles Master. And she needed to glide down and find a place to land, but there was really no place appropriate nearby. There were fields, but they had apple trees in them, or cows, or homes were too close. She was in a terrible situation and did her best.
And you actually recreate, or your research has recreated exactly what happened in those final minutes.
Yes, that crash, as well as a number of the other major crashes in the book, took a huge amount of research to reconstruct what happened, because there was a war on, and at the time no one was investigating in any detail what occurred. I found little note cards in the RAF museum that had little punch card holes on them to indicate basically what had occurred. It was mostly about what happened to the aircraft, and then there'd be one sentence of a pilot deceased, but nothing really about how it occurred. So I had a real team of aviation experts, historic aviation experts, because someone from today would be useless. And we would go through these records together, as well as diaries and letters where the women themselves described what had occurred, and try to reconstruct exactly what had happened. I really was determined to do that because this book is for a general audience, and a lot of technical stuff about what can go wrong with an airplane is not really what they're reading it for. I wanted them to understand what this experience was like for the pilot, when they would know something had gone wrong, what they would do next, how they would evaluate their options. I usually knew the outcome of the crash, so I would know how do they get from there to there. And these people, I owe them such a debt because they were so helpful. And some of us joke that we should open a historic aviation detective agency together to reconstruct crashes from the past. And I also tracked down people who were witnesses to these crashes. Most of them were children at the time, and now we're in more advanced years, but they all remembered what they had seen very clearly. It was quite traumatic for children to see it. And they gave me crucial information that told me what happened in those final minutes of some of these flights.
Investigative journalism, right?
A different kind, yes.
This is Evelyn Hudson, and this is actually, she was in the hospital talking about airplane crashes. She had one herself, which landed her in the hospital for quite a while. Yes,
she was in a crash where, now I forget, it might have been the Wimpy, It was a large bomber that had cloth sides, one of the older ones, and when it hit the ground, she was propelled through the fabric and onto the ground. And we saw in that other photograph how high some of these bombers were. She hit the ground and had broken several vertebrae in her back. She was in a full body cast for many months. This is a photograph of her in the hospital. It was very painful. Finally, she was sent home because they determined she could not continue. However, about a year later, she applied to come back because she wanted to try again. But at that point, they weren't accepting any more foreign flyers, so she couldn't make that happen.
But just speaks to her determination to remain in the sky.
Yes, I mean, I was always so impressed with how brave these people were, the men and the women. So many people who participated in the war, doing jobs that were so dangerous. They never knew what flight might be their last. And I always thought, I can't imagine myself doing this. And very few people today have had to make a sacrifice to that extent for their country. I'm just so impressed that someone would go through that experience. We're seeing what an ordeal it was, and yet still want to come back and do it some more. I don't know if I could do it.
It takes a very special dedication to do it.
Yeah, it does. And an ability to tune out what could go wrong.
Yes.
They had to stay calm and not think about this could really go south on me. They had to concentrate. And I would have trouble with that too.
But and I think that some of that comes out in your writing in the book about, first of all, the determination to get into the skies in the first place in the 1930s, early 40s, but also, dealing with the types of equipment they were dealing with. Like you said, they just sort of put that aside, and this is my job. This is what I came here to do. This is what I'm going to do, and probably not worrying about whether that was going to be the last time you take off or not. There's always tomorrow.
Never do it. It's interesting you would say that right now, because this is Nancy Miller in front of a torpedo bomber, which was an unusual aircraft for them. Oh. She is the last living air transport pilot in the world right now from World War II. She's 105 years old.
Wow.
I've seen her quite recently. She's a very tough person. And I remember saying to her, "Weren't you scared?" What we were just talking about. And she said, "No, I had a job to do." Very matter of fact about it. And that's why she was another one who was very successful, made it through to the end, flew a wide variety of planes and had a successful career after the war. She was able to just get on with it. There she is, piloting a helicopter in Alaska. And you can see just her whole attitude. You can see she is not freaked out in any way. She is completely calm.
Absolutely amazing. Do you know how long she operated her charter company in Alaska?
Oh, I mean, I could tell you if I looked it up, but it was a long time. It was about 20 years, and the engine noise damaged her hearing. So when we met, I had to write out my questions, and she would answer in a very forthright way. But it's a shame that happened to a lot of early aviators.
Oh, yes.
There's Virginia Farr. Now, she came from a background very different from the crop dusters and the stunt pilots. She was a member of the Western Union Fortune family. She was expected to be a debutante and to go to debutante balls and meet an equally wealthy husband and have a very cushy life. This did not appeal to her at all. When she found out about flying, she wanted a career in aviation. She had the money to pay for her lessons and went on to become a flight instructor before the war. Here she is during the war with a Spitfire. You can see she's just glowing. There are so many photographs of her at these debutante events where she's just looking out of place and like she'd rather be anywhere else. Then when you see the photographs of her at airfields or with airplanes, she's got this look of someone who's doing exactly what she wants to do. So going to England, she saw that as a release from her gilded cage. She could live the way she wanted to live and she never went back. She continued to live the way she wanted from then on.
Quite a story. Winnie Pierce?
Well, we talked about people who like the thrill of flying. I will say Virginia Farr, who we just saw, was known to be a very careful and diligent flyer. She was Winnie Pierce's arch rival because Virginia was the first one promoted to fighters after Helen Richie, and then the first promoted to bombers almost immediately. Most people had to wait a long time for that because she was rock solid, steady, careful, followed the rules. Her arch rival here is Winnie Pierce. Winnie was wild in the air and on the ground. She lived for thrills. She did not follow the rules right from the beginning. She did what she pleased, and she also wanted to be first at everything, and she was usually right there neck and neck with Virginia Farr, showing that two very different kinds of personalities can excel, and one of them was the somewhat crazier one. ATA pilots were forbidden to fly using instruments, even in bad weather. Often the instruments hadn't been installed yet in the new aircraft, but it was also the policy of the organization that they didn't want people to recklessly take off in bad weather, so they thought if they were not trained on instruments, that would help prevent that. It was very controversial. Many people felt that lives would have been saved had they done that, and thought that perhaps it was a cynical decision to save money and time on training, knowing that a few lives would be lost. Almost immediately when Winnie was assigned to Hurricane Fighters, one of the first things she did was go up above the clouds and then come back down using instruments, which she knew on her own how to do. She didn't care. But one of her very first flights on a Hurricane really tested her mettle. It was a brand new Hurricane right from a factory again. She took off from the airfield, and in a very short time, the engine failed completely. As pilots know, it's one of the worst things that can happen in the air. If something goes wrong when you're very high in the sky, you have a lot of time to figure out what to do. You can glide down, you can choose your spot. If your engine fails when you're not at a top speed yet, when you're not very high, you have very few options. The ATA policy was when that happened, you were supposed to just aim straight ahead and crash. They thought you had the best chance of surviving. She could see there were houses up ahead. She didn't want to crash. Only 2 weeks before, one of her classmates had been in a similar situation and crashed and died. And Winnie had served as pallbearer at the funeral. So she decided instantly, as Winnie would, she was breaking the rules and decided to do what pilots call the impossible turn. Mm-hmm. That meant that she was going to try to turn this aircraft around and land on the airfield, despite being at a low height and at a low speed. It's a very dangerous thing to do because it's so easy to lose the lift of the aircraft, lose the speed, and crash sideways as you're trying to turn. It's also very hard because you have to adjust for the wind direction at each point in the turn. And it was also a fairly new aircraft to her. Like, she didn't know how the flaps would work going against in the wrong way in the wind. All kinds of things would indicate that she should not have done this, but she decided in a snap, which was all the time she had, that she would try to do this impossible turn, and she did succeed. Everyone at the airfield saw her come in and couldn't believe it. Up until then, people had rolled their eyes at Winnie Pierce, particularly the British, who thought she was very raucous, and she was a big party girl. After that, everyone had to look at her with new respect. Whatever they might have thought of her wild, thrill-seeking nature, she was a pilot of exceptional ability. They had to recognize that. She did continue through the war, having a sterling record, despite frequently doing what she was not supposed to do.
Oh, amazing. And there's also a gentleman in this story as well.
Yes, well, there are quite a few gentlemen in this story. This one, I guess, was enough of a figure to merit his photograph. He was a well-known man about town in London named Peter Beasley, and he was one of the first American officers to come to England when just a skeleton crew of people came over at the beginning of the war to decide how to deploy. He was supposedly in charge of logistics. He had quite a wild affair with Winnie Pierce, frequently staying in his suite at Claridge's Hotel, which was very fancy. No one really suspected that Colonel Beasley wasn't who he purported to be. Eventually, it did come out that he was involved in espionage, and that made his story quite interesting. I don't think we have photographs of the other men in the story, but many of the pilots were involved with men during the war, and several of them were involved with bomber pilots, American bomber pilots, and in one case, a British bomber pilot. And as I'm sure you know, that is one of the most dangerous jobs in the war, and the percentage of people who came out unscathed was really low. So it was a really romantically risky thing to do, to get involved with a bomber pilot. And my women did, sometimes with tragic effect, sometimes with mixed effect. One was taken prisoner for a long period, and sometimes it worked out. But it added to the suspense, which was already ratcheted up to 11 in everything they were doing.
and that reminds me of two quotes. The first one from Colonel Beasley, when he was sort of gathering intelligence, and he would go to dinner with people, and he said every dinner invitation, correct me if I get this wrong, every dinner invitation involves someone picking his brain without giving him any information back on the other side.
Without letting,
was interesting.
Yes. Yeah. He said that early on to one of our women that we followed, because he became very friendly with a lot of them. And you would think that might have been a tip-off that his job wasn't really logistics. But one reason he was a man about town is he was out there getting scuttlebutt, and he often went out with the women from the ATA because it was very celebratory, and they would have champagne and dance, and he could do his thing. But also, what no one knew until later, he was going off on secret missions throughout the war. He would disappear supposedly to go investigate some logistical problem, but in fact, he was in Germany or in the Middle East or somewhere gathering information.
Yes. And of course, as we were speaking of romance.
Yes, this is Dorothy Fury, the impoverished beauty from New Orleans, who actually married a bomber pilot early in the war who did not survive. And while married to him, had an affair with this gentleman, Lord David Beatty, a millionaire lord who was quite taken with her. He saw her at the bar at the Southampton Hotel. She was stationed near there, and wanted to meet her, but being a very proper British gentleman, he felt he couldn't introduce himself. So he invited the entire airbase to a ball that he gave in order to have her come, and so he might meet her at the ball, where they danced together all night. And as you can see, their romance did pretty well, and she's looking very prosperous there. Well, this is post-war, yeah. After the war, she was a prominent member of British society and had many scandalous affairs, including with Anthony Eden, the future prime minister. That's our Dorothy.
Yeah.
But many people in England, when I started research on the book, she was known in England as an American heiress, because they assumed, as she had intended, that she was someone very well-to-do. So even decades later, people still didn't realize that that was not her actual background.
It is an amazing story, and that whether it was the other quote that was, I believe, in some of your advanced materials when you were starting to research the book. Someone from a military, I think it was a military aviation museum, asked if you were going to sensationalize the story, because they said you don't have to. It's sensational as it is.
Yes, it was a museum about the ATA. It's in Maidenhead, and it's very charming. They have a Spitfire simulator that people can fly there. But I did speak to him early on, and he said, I hope you don't plan to fictionalize this, because nothing could be as dramatic and glamorous as the reality. Little did I know that it was beyond what even he thought. These women were such characters and led such dramatic lives. Each new thing I found out, I just couldn't believe it.
With the research that went into the book, did you have mostly from historic archives? Did you get things from families? How did you find all of this material?
Well, it was quite a challenge because these women were forgotten after the war. And they were the kinds of people who you would think there would be information in libraries and research institutions about them. And there were a couple who had donated diaries and letters to institutions. The very first one that I visited was the San Diego Air and Space Museum, because I had heard that Mary Zerbel had donated her papers there. I went to the museum, and the librarian told me I was the first person who had ever asked to see them. I opened these sort of dusty files, and it blew me away. This was the first person I'd done this with. I could just feel her come alive to me in these journals she had written. There were many newspaper articles about her when she was so well known for being the youngest flying instructor. There were all the articles about her when she married in England, articles about the Lana Turner movie. I thought, wow, she must be the most dramatic one of all. But the last page I came to was her obituary, which ran in a small town paper in Idaho. It was only 3 sentences, and it didn't say a thing about her flying. This is the extent to which this story got lost in history. So I vowed right then, I am on a mission. People need to know about this.
Absolutely.
These were the very first British women who were permitted to fly, and that would have been in January of 1940. And they were flying what's called a Tiger Moth. It's a small training aircraft, open cockpit. Their job was to truss up in these heavy, very unflattering suits and fly north to Scotland in the middle of winter. They felt that they had to perform perfectly so that other women would get to do the job, and so they delivered perfection. They never had an accident, a glitch. They toughed it out through the cold. They would take night trains back, sleep on their parachutes in the aisles of trains to make sure that other women got this opportunity, which they soon did because they did a fantastic job. And I think the woman, yeah, I see her, the second from the right is Joan Hughes, the one who later posed under that Sterling bomber.
Okay. The amazing story, and this book is just, we've had an hour and we've just scratched the surface on the stories that are there. But again, overall, the research that you put into this and your writing style, the passion for this subject that you have, brings these ladies and their careers to life, and they're not forgotten anymore. This is a record of a very important part of aviation history that, as you've mentioned and others have, is it should not be forgotten, because it really is. They were groundbreaking in many ways. Again, learning how to fly in the 30s, but also in their service to country and selfless dedication, not only to the United States, but also to a different country who happened to be on the same side, and to go to do that, and the dedication that they showed throughout their time with the ATA.
Yes, they do deserve to be remembered, and I think it's important if you're a young woman today thinking, oh, aviation, that sounds like a tough field. I don't know if I can make it in that. I think it's valuable to know that 80 years ago, there were women who achieved this extraordinary level of accomplishment in aviation under very tough conditions. It shows that it can be done, and I hope it's inspiring to people.
I think it is. It's a story that's inspiring, not only for those who are maybe wanting to be pilots, but also for anyone who just wants to get into any field of opportunity where they maybe don't feel like they would belong. These ladies certainly didn't technically belong in aviation in their time period, but they broke through and showed the way for all of us to be able to pursue our dreams.
You make a very good point there. I think the story is universal. It can apply to any field where you think, wow, it's tough to make it in that field. Should I even try? I think it's inspiring to anyone, whether they ever wanted to even fly in an airplane, let alone operate an airplane, to see what can be done when people put their minds to it.
Absolutely.
Also,
congratulations on the book. It is out. If someone would like to get a copy of the book, where can they find it?
oh, it's available anywhere books are sold, anywhere online, anywhere in a store. It's all over the place. You can't avoid it.
Good. And you'll be doing some public appearances month of May and into June. And if folks are interested in those, is there a website that they can go to find out that schedule?
Well, you can go to my website. They're all on there. It's beckyaikman.com. There will be probably more added, but there are events in Atlanta, New York, Richmond, Virginia, California. I hope to meet a lot of people everywhere. I've been in my little room writing by myself all this time, and it would be fun to meet people and talk to them.
There you go. Becky, before we go, now that you've got this book wrapped up, is there another one that you're thinking of potentially writing in the future?
I haven't made any kind of decision yet. You know, when you write nonfiction, you can't make it up. You're stuck. How good is this story in the first place? This story in the first place is so good. I don't know how I'll find one that matches it for all the many elements of excitement and drama and importance that it has. So I'll be very careful in picking the next one.
It sounds good. Best wishes with that, with the book sales and the book tour. And again, thank you for spending time with us as this book comes out right in time for the 80th anniversary of VE Day. So thank you again, Becky.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us tonight. We'd like to hear your thoughts on tonight's episode, or if you have ideas for future topics, just drop us a line, media@cafhq.org. And remember, please share this across your social media platforms. And if you are subscribing on YouTube, make sure you click that bell icon. You'll get the notifications when our new episodes are posted. Until next time, I'm Steve Boss, wishing you blue skies and tailwinds. Have a great night.